So basically, what we are saying is there are 5 key components of this ecosystem. Where it starts from is the first starting point is, of course, after the prerequisites. Hypothetically, for a moment, let's assume that the prerequisites are done and the ground is ready to implement this ecosystem. Where it has to start from? It has to start from the competency matrix. So any particular organization, and for our discussion per se, let's take a warehouse. Let's take Amazon as an example. If they had to deliver the last mile promise and they have to ensure that the drivers that they hire, because they have to hire in thousands, and they do not have the capacity or the capability or the time, rather, more than capacity and capability, they do not have the time to train those thousands of new hired on Amazon's culture and values. So the brand promise is at stake. So what do we do? Now, an organization like Amazon, if we assume, would have a competency matrix. They would have defined that our drivers should reflect XYZ type of behaviors. Organizations, and not just Amazon, we would rather say that every organization would have these listed somewhere. In some organizations, it could be stored in a sophisticated, complex software application. In some organizations, it could be on paper. So the idea is that if you as an organization have this competency, data around competency, or if you have listed out the skills that you want to see in your employees at any certain place, so that's the starting point. You have the competency matrix, and then we move on to the second component, that's the performance data. So there are various systems, various applications, there are various ways through which performance data is captured. I'm not using the term measured specifically. I'm just focusing on the term captured. So performance data is captured in multiple ways in a typical organization. So it could be an application which your manager uses to, capture your performance data. It could be a 360-degree feedback form that is rolled out to your peers, supervisors, and subordinates, and they give you feedback on that on your certain competencies. It could be your annual KRAs, key responsibility areas. If you're in the sales domain, it could be your sales quota, your CRM details. If you're in the warehouse department, then the matrix associated with performance in the warehouses. So what happens is, in the current environment, this performance data is getting captured in silos, in multiple software applications, in multiple systems, in multiple formats. What we have to do is we have to work around this and ensure that we create a central location where all this data, which is captured, performance data, which is captured, is transferred in a particular way. And this data is now presented in a standardized manner. In the tech terms, we would call it data modeling. So you prepare the data in a manner in which the AI can read it. And then you run that data, performance data, against the desired competency matrix. And that's where you identify the competency gaps. Once you have identified the competency gaps, and those competency gaps could be, were you able to deliver the last mile promise? Was the customer satisfied? Do you have communication skills while working remotely with your colleagues? So those kind of, not the broad level ones, like, are you good at management? Are you good at leadership? Are you good at sales? What Christoph was referring to earlier. So at a granular level. So once you have identified the competency matrix, then what we need to do is we need to provide training, learning, skilling, upskilling, reskilling. In a typical organization, there would be a variety of sources through which you can train, educate, coach your people, your employees. You could have a learning management system, which is having tons of e-learning courses, which are pretty custom to your organization. You could have a subscription to a content library like Skillsoft, where you have thousands of courses available. And then there's open educational resources, like you have YouTubes or blog sites or research papers. everything out there. Now, what we need to do, how we can leverage AI. So there's a lot of this learning resources available. So now the learner, the employee is aware of their competency gaps, but what they need to do to cover up that competency gap, that is where AI will come into picture again. So AI can go and based on the competency gaps identified, can identify the right type of content in that plethora of content, can identify the right pieces and put it and put a customized or a, as we were talking about, a hyper personalized learning pathway or a career pathway. And we'll look at one such example wherein a skilling platform is doing this. We'll look at that example. So now we have the learning and the career pathway set up by using AI. Then what do? We are working remotely. Probably for some more time, we'll continue working that. And we are never, probably not going to come back to normal. So the peer-to-peer learning, the water cooler moments are not happening. So do we leave the learner, the employee alone? What do they do? So we need to provide them continuous support. Now, this is where, again, we can leverage AI. So we can have an AI-enabled smart bot, which is integrated in an office productivity tool like Microsoft Teams, Slack, or Skype. And this virtual coach is available for that particular individual. So this virtual coach has been trained, this virtual coach, the smart bot has been trained and it knows that, I'm coach for individual XYZ. This individual has certain competency gaps. This individual is going through this recommended learning pathway. And at any point of time, he or she can come back to me and ask questions and I will guide him or her in the right direction. So a virtual coach guiding in the entire journey. And we'll look at one such example. And then the last one is you complete the loop. So as an organization, you decide that, for how many period of months, maybe 6 months or a year, you want to implement this framework, run this cycle. And at the end of it, you go and close the loop. And that's where you can use AI. So you can, use AI to evaluate a particular learner, particular employee, and figure out where they are as compared to where they were 6 months back or 12 months back in terms of competency gaps. Have they moved ahead? Is there a delta, a positive delta or a negative delta? And based on that, we repeat the cycle again. So this kind of a framework for an AI-enabled skilling, reskilling, upskilling ecosystem. And organizations which are paper-based, it's not that complex to set up this particular structure. And the good news with AI is that you can scale it up for a number of people.